What's up, Internet? You're tuned into the season finale of We Watched Invincible. On this episode, we are here to discuss Invincible, Season 1, Episode 8, Where I Really Come From. And I gotta tell you where I really come from, and it's the land of just absolute hype, because this is where it's all been building to, right? This is the main fucking event, and at least for me, this episode didn't disappoint. I am super, super excited to jump in and talk about it with y'all. So let's just get into the fucking meat of it here. Sean, what'd you think about the episode?
Yeah, so I think this is the crux of the series, as far as like this is where stuff really starts to get going.
Yeah.
And it happens, I guess I would say, earlier in the show, in the comic, than it does in the show. Even though there's only been 8 episodes of the show, it feels like so much has happened that they kind of moved things around.
Sure.
And it's what the show's been building towards, and I think the moment definitely works. And you really feel like, I think hats off to Steven Yen, because he did a tremendous job of selling Mark and Mark's emotions. I know that some people have been underwhelmed by J.K. Simmons' performance throughout this series. I felt like he was good here. I thought he did well too. I do have some criticisms, but I think that when it comes to the way that moment was handled, I thought it was effective.
How about you, Phil? Oh, I'm sorry, Sean. I thought you were done.
I was going to jump into my critiques.
Yeah.
Too much murder. Like, I'm not normally even that dude, but boy, oh boy, like, just too much. The part in the train where Mark's body is being used to cut through people. Yeah, I don't know. It was just too much for me.
That was brutal. Yeah.
More fatalities in this than there was in the Mortal Kombat movie.
Didn't fully watch it, but I believe you.
Wait, did that come out?
Yes.
Really?
Yeah. Came out like a week ago.
Look at me behind on the movies. Phil, what'd you think about the episode?
Yeah, Sean's right. So I think when it comes to the first half of Invincible, which you can check out in our book club that we did for it, this moment is kind of like the inciting incident getting us out of the gate for real. Like, first 10, 12 issues of the book are familiarizing you with the characters, and it's kind of just the self-aware superhero trope stuff. That is where it starts to really stand on its own 2 feet, is what happens in this episode. And it's a good choice, I think, for a season finale. And unlike in the book, which this event was completely out of left field, we've been building to this, like Sean said. And it's interesting because it dwells on it. It dwells on all of it. And I also felt squeamish by just the amount of brutality that takes place here. But I also recognize that's the point. It lingers on the violence to make you feel very uncomfortable. It draws the lines between Mark and his dad to, like, they're very well-defined lines drawn in the sand here. It was a good episode. I liked it a lot. I think it was an effective finale, but last time I was on, I critiqued that the show length felt a little long, and at 45 minutes, I don't know if I needed all 45 minutes of this, but I still think it was effective in its message that I was trying to portray here.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, I feel like this episode really landed this season well. I obviously, I'm a huge Invincible fanboy, so like there's a large amount of like excitement that comes for me with watching this series, even divorced from how I feel about any given episode, but I think, like, taking off the fanboy glasses for a minute and really trying to think about narratively how this season kind of played out, like, I think that there are definitely missteps, I think, throughout this season, but I think by and large, I think they did a good job of adapting Invincible and trying to keep the spirit of what makes it unique among superhero stories while also trying to do something fresh. And this moment and kind of the overall playing of the Nolan Mark relationship has been pretty much the biggest change, the biggest departure. And I think for better and worse, but I think this episode was a lot more better. And I was happy about that because I think the thing that stuck out to me the most was what Phil called out about how, you know, in the comic, this conflict feels so much shorter. It feels like a moment, you know, and it's a series defining moment. It's a defining moment in Mark's life and for the people of Earth, but it feels more clandestine. It feels more like it happened and everybody kind of knows about it, but people don't really know the details. And, you know, it is what it is. Whereas like we called out in the last episode how the way that the pacing of the fight escalated and played out so that like news cameras got involved and all of a sudden it was this moment that like the world stopped and you could hear a pin drop and everyone's watching this conflict and like really engaged with it. And I think that spirit kind of carried into this episode really well as well, I think. And not only do you feel that tension while everybody's watching the conflict, but also in kind of the aftermath and actually like exploring like, here are all the minor characters we set up this season. Like, what does this mean for them? You know, like, and what does it mean for them emotionally, but also like where we could see them go in season 2 or season 3. And the fact that it kind of, you know, this moment, right, had to serve as the season finale, but also kind of the kicking off point for everything that's going to come next. That's kind of a tough act to balance. And I think while, you know, I think Phil's point about bloat, like is fair. I think probably every episode of Invincible could probably be 5 minutes shorter at least.
Yeah.
But I think in this episode, the places in which it took its time were generally more intimate and
Yes.
like quieter moments. And I think that worked to its favor as well. Because so much of the episode is the fight that the other moments giving you some room to breathe as a viewer, but also giving you a different flavor than the rest of the episode was kind of a welcome, you know, build up and then cool down, you know?
Yeah, the fight itself is really nauseating. We highlighted the train scene earlier. It's, you know, when you have a fight in media, you want it to have ramifications. You want it to mean something, and this has been multiple episodes brewing. But if the whole episode was just a fight, you know, it's not that wouldn't be a satisfying conclusion. Just because it would be, you'd feel sick after finishing it. So having the moments with like Mark and his friends at the fast food restaurant and stuff like that, it lets it breathe and kind of takes you back to where it was.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I think the point about like the violence and everything, you know, I think that's something that we've talked about a bit in the show, and just how like I think seeing some of these things in animation, like it hits different because it's less like imagining what happens between the margins and like you're seeing every gory detail. And like I think sometimes that has felt like gratuitous, and I think this episode's the most violent one, but I actually didn't feel that way about it. I think because of the thing that Phil outlined, where like it's fucked up and it gives you a sick feeling in your stomach and it feels bad. But to me, like you said, like that's kind of the point, right? Like it makes the fear and like the uncertainty that Mark is experiencing feel like very immediate and very visceral, you know? And that was something that like it definitely it struck a chord with me, and like it was a bad chord, but not in a I didn't like this way, and as much as a like in the same way that Sean, you called out like Steven Yeun's performance and like how well he sells this. I think those moments helped ground me in that, and in that the shock and the fear that he's experiencing in that moment, you know?
I would agree if the show didn't go down this road every episode, but it just feels like it loves its violence too much. And so you can't sell me in episode 8 on violence mattering when every episode is like this. So yeah, I think if they showed more restraint in earlier episodes, this would have worked a lot better. But it feels like violence porn, and that's kind of the difference for me. There's the fear that Mark has is clearly present, and I think that again, it's a great job that's done to sell that. But sometimes you don't need to go all the way.
Mm-hmm.
And I also, again, like, you know, we've seen catastrophic death and murder on this show already. So
And I think that's fair. I think this show, like, being a compressed version of a lot of the early events, like, that has led to that, I think, feeling like, because like you compare it to the comic, right? And like there are some fucking violent moments in the comic, but they're way more spread out.
Yeah.
And it makes them feel more shocking when they do happen. So like I think to your point, right? Like if the ending of episode 1 is fucking hyper violent and then there's no violence and then this is that violent again, that hits harder. And I think it's a byproduct of the way that the story is being told and like the medium in which it's being told, like truncating things so much that like you're hitting those moments so much more frequently, and like things that don't play out as violent in the book are more violent in the show.
Yeah, see, it feels stylistic. It feels like this was a decision from the producers or whomever wanted to amp up the violence here, and it's a choice. I don't hate it necessarily, but I think Sean's 100% right that when you do this for 8 straight episodes, it loses the impact here. Because if we isolate this episode from the other 7 episodes and you just showed a person this with very little context, you can understand what's happening, because narratively it does a very good job of basically, this is Omni-Man's deal. He's saying it to you. He thinks people are paper and they're like bugs and their lives are insignificant. Underneath all that, all this over-the-top violence is a father basically on the verge of murdering his son. That's impactful. Mm-hmm. But you watch that for 7 other episodes, not specifically that, but this level of violence, you become desensitized.
Yeah. Well, and I think I just continue on this point. I guess this is kind of my last thing on it. Like the moment with the pilot that like Mark fights so hard to save and then Omni-Man kills him, that I think works so well. And then you escalate it again, and then you have the train thing, right? And again, like it didn't not work for me, but it does feel like okay, you did that and it played, and then you're like, but subvert your expectations and go harder, Mm-hmm. And I think that I definitely like, while it didn't necessarily, it sounds like I'm on the same page with you, Phil, where it didn't necessarily diminish my experience, but like I can't argue with what you're saying, Sean. I think it's like a completely salient criticism, that like it's something that, because of the medium and the choices they're making to tell the story in this way, like it just doesn't work as well as it does in the books. That's to me one of the defining things of the book, is like the restraint for those extreme moments. The extreme moments feel so real because they come out of nowhere. Whereas like Mark was almost dead like 2 episodes ago, and now he's almost dead again. It's all right. Yeah, he'll be fine.
That's a good point. A big thing in storytelling is you should never go huge right out of the gate necessarily. Like you think of the Star Trek movies where you have in the very first movie just a bunch of planets blowing up. It's like, where do you go from there narratively? And you think about the MCU, you don't get to the planet blowing up stuff until like 10 movies in.
Sure.
You want to kind of build up to that. And it's the same thing with the stakes for the character. If your character's on the verge of death multiple times in 8 episodes, it's not as impactful because you're like, you'll be fine.
Yeah. And I think one of the pieces of news that are relevant to this discussion, right, is like season 2 and 3 have been approved. And I'm very excited about that, because I think the idea of like, ideally the popularity could lead to like longer season order, so they have more episodes to play with. But even just the idea that they can plan a season 2 and a season 3 at the same time is going to allow.
Huge.
Yeah, it's huge. It's going to allow them to tell stories over a longer period of time rather than being like, this is our one shot to get this over. We really need to make this season like, to Phil's point, right? The opposite. We need to come out of the gate fucking swinging because there's not a lot of oxygen in the room and we've got to carve out our niche. And like the show did. It has, So now I think, it's going to be interesting to see what they're able to do with a little bit more wiggle room, with a little bit more security in terms of like, well, we know we have at least 16 episodes to play with now versus 8.
You don't run into the problems that The Legend of Korra ran into, which only knew what season was getting right before production.
Exactly. So you have to like have a season arc and you have to be able to be like, this could be the end, you know?
Yeah.
So, on the note of the fight and everything, something that like I found myself thinking about a lot in this episode was something that we talked about in the last episode of this show, but also over the course of this season is kind of like the significant differences in Nolan's character and this idea of where we read up to in the comics, right? No spoilers for beyond that. And if you haven't checked out the book club, that's up to issue 35. There's a hint at like, this path towards Omni-Man being, a different person, right? And kind of moving away from who he was as a Viltrumite and carving a new path forward. And the fact that they really, really drove home, like how much collateral damage he caused on his way out the door, and like, even just like seeing like characters like Art who wanted to believe in the best of him in the book, he like throws out that picture of them in this, right? Like, it felt to me like they were really trying to lean into that. And to like commit to the idea that he is a different Nolan than we know. And maybe there's a softness in him or whatever, right? We see the thing with the baseball game and he finds a way to connect with his son, but
I mean, he leaves in this, because he has a conflicted heart.
Yeah, right. You can see that, but I also think that like they take him to a much like the well goes deeper here, right? Like I feel like
he's a mass murderer.
Yeah, like like a lot, like it's like a natural disaster level of mass murder.
Dude's gonna go down with like the likes of Genghis Khan and Alexander the Great in terms of just the sheer massacres he committed.
Right.
Yeah,
in a day.
There's no redeeming him. Like you can't. It's just like you can't have a character who kills that many people. Like you can't do a redemption arc for that. He wasn't under mind control. Like that, those were his choices. Like he has to be just that. Even if he, doesn't want to kill Mark, even if he reaches out to Mark for help down the road, even if he tries to patch it up with his son or whatever, they can't try to convince the audience that this is a character that we should have sympathy for.
There's monsters across history that have sympathy for their children or whatever, It's
It is kind of funny. It reminds me of like the discourse or when like the peak popularity of like Game of Thrones. And I remember like having a conversation with my dad where he's like, well, like Cersei's not the worst person. She cares about her children. I was like, so what? Like that doesn't matter.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like the bare minimum of being a human.
Literally, the only path I can see him walking back is just a path of utility, where it's like he's clearly just heads and shoulders above everyone on planet Earth, and like there's no redemption arc. But like, also, how can they? Can't really turn him away if he comes back. Like how? Like physically, they can't.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I don't know where it's gonna go, but I'm interested because it feels like a choice to draw that line in the sand and have that delineation. in the same way they've made other significant choices to change certain characters. And I'm just excited to see how it plays out and see where it goes from here, you know? So I did want to just focus back in on Steven Yeun for a minute, because I loved his performance in this episode. Sean called it out at the top. Like, I like his portrayal of Mark across the board. I think he's done a great job. But this episode specifically, I was really impressed with his voice acting and just like the level of vulnerability that I feel like he brings to the character, and like those moments where he really just sounds like a kid, you know, like a scared kid, who's in way over his head. I think that added a lot of gravity to this episode, and it made the stakes, like, you know, when he's like holding the building up and trying to save this woman and her child and everything, like just that kind of like hopelessness of like he's really truly giving it everything he has, and it's just not enough.
Yeah, and you know what? To his credit, he comes off like he's been a seasoned voice actor for many years, and you just feel it in his voice honestly, this whole episode hinges on him and J.K. Simmons' performance together, and you feel the desperation and from Mark, and then from Omni-Man, you feel like the determination of like, you know, this is the way things have always been. It's like the old generation trying to like prove something to the new generation. You feel the emotional crux of it all. It great performances. I can't stress that enough.
I think with J.K. Simmons, I really liked the moments where he like breaks, like where they're like having a regular conversation. He's trying to maintain control, but then he would like get angry and yell, like when he gives up and he just screams. He's like, "Why'd you make me do this? Like, why didn't you just fucking listen to me?" And like, just fucking finally pieces. Like,
yeah, exactly.
That felt so sincere, you know, like that frustration and that anger, and like then it turning to tears as he flies away or whatever, right? Like it like almost felt like you know, like when you're like a young kid and like, you know, someone like gets like hurt, you're playing sports and they like freak out and yell and cry and run away. Like that it's like that very, you know, like you can't control the emotion that's pouring out.
Yeah, it was my dad's reaction when I went to school for podcasting. He's like, "Why would you do that? You should get a degree in something else more useful."
Like journalism.
you too.
Thank you. Sean and I will be here all week.
Good stuff.
Oh, man. So, obviously that's like kind of the main crux of the episode, right? Is watching the conflict. But like I said, I think the thing that that lands the plane really nicely is the fallout and seeing how all of this affects everybody else. And again, I think it speaks to, even though, you know, I think we've all to varying degrees had some criticisms about like some of the pacing of the show and like the fact that 8 episodes is not a lot of time to do all the things that Invincible, you know, wants and needs to do.
Yeah.
But I think the fact that you come to the end of this episode and there's like a solid 10 minutes that you can spend walking around to all of the characters that we know and feel things about and being like, here's how their life is affected. It speaks to how much ground we were able to effectively cover despite those limitations. And it made me feel happy that, like, you know, I don't think that this season was like perfect. I don't think it was the perfect adaptation, you know, of Invincible, but like, I think for where Invincible was at as a property and like, you know, as a series prior to the show, I think this season was a really good like coming out party for it, you know, of like, here's what Invincible is and what it's about and why you've heard people talk about it, right? Or why, you know, why it's getting this push now.
Sure.
And that for me as a longtime fan has been like super rewarding to see. It's so cool to see people connecting with it.
Well, Pete, you're the super fan here, so I mean that lends the question now. What do you want to see out of season 2? We've got a bunch of little threads. You talked about, you know, ruminating the last 10 minutes of all our characters. What would you like to see?
I think for me, it's very much that I want to see the mechanics of the show grow. I think, you know, when you think about animation and the way that animation operates, like this show was in development for like almost 2 years before it came out, you know? So much of it was made in a bubble. And now it's come out, it's found an audience, it has, you know, there's been criticism of it, and now the team with this increased episode count, right, is able to kind of like take all of those learnings and, you know, take what they've learned about the characters and the way that they're changing them and the directions they'd like to go and really like sit down and think about where do we go next. And for me, like, all I want is to continue the trajectory that we established here, but see the execution improve. Like, I'd like to see the animation get sharper. I'd like to see, you know, a longer episode count, even if it meant the episodes were shorter.
Sure.
I want to see the storylines that, you know, take place over 30 or 60 or 75 issues take place over seasons, not episodes.
Yeah.
And, you know, we talked about it in this season. Like, sometimes that worked. You know, sometimes truncating it was fine. Sometimes it really wasn't. And it was never bad, per se. And I think if I hadn't read the comics, I might not think twice about it. But knowing how things hit in the book versus how they hit in the show, I want to see the show get a bit more parity with the comics, not in terms of the beats or the direction it wants to go, but just in the way that Invincible as a book is able to craft big moments that feel surprising, but that don't feel like a left turn, that feel like a, oh my God, we've been building this in the fucking background and I didn't even realize it until it all came together and until it all clicked. And I feel like the pacing of this season has made it so that as a device doesn't really exist in Invincible right now. And to me, that is one of the crowning reasons to read the book. So I want the show, now that it is confirmed that it's going to be a multi-season deal, and you imagine they're going to get another multi-season order probably at the end of season 2 and yada, yada, yada. Like, I want to see it commit to longer form storytelling and to lay threads and then leave them alone. You know? And I think there's some stuff in this season that is like that. The Damien Darkblood stuff, I feel like some of that shit's going to come home to roost later in ways we don't expect, which is cool. But I want to know that, and I want to see those machinations, like in the way that Robot Story was told this entire season. More of that shit. That's what Invincible does best.
Man, I think the show needs to do less. That's one of the things that I really came away from this episode wishing, is that it just took more time to focus on specific things. Like, you know, I could do without seeing those twins ever again, and I'm sure that they'll come back. But like, I hate those characters, and you know, I would have traded easily every second that we spent with them for more Adam Eve. You know, they introduced that one villain who was like new to the show, I guess, that they never showed again. And I can't even believe they did that. Like, what are you doing? What is that for? Because
season
people
2
will, yeah, but people will forget. Like, what? Okay, so that moment was like, let's say 3 minutes of the show, and it doesn't come up again in season 1, and then in season 2 it comes up, and it's like, it's not going to feel like, oh my God, remember that thing? Because that didn't mean anything. It was literally just, here's a guy. And then now I'm supposed to care? Nah, not really. I wish the show would slow down, take more time to focus on the important things and the important characters. And, you know, I guess maybe they didn't know they were going to get multiple seasons. I kind of find that hard to believe. But presuming they didn't, I guess you feel like you got to get your stuff in. Why would you even add that scene then? Why would you add a scene with a guy you don't even plan to deal with in the first season if you don't know you're going to get multiple seasons?
I think that's fair. That's a good point. Yeah.
I wish that, you know, they would have, like, if Omni-Man is a good person ultimately, or you know, whatever we're meant to believe about him, like that baseball scene, I would have liked to see more scenes with him and Mark where he wasn't such a harsh person.
Yeah.
to get more attached to their relationship so that it hurts more that he's bad. I just feel like there were moments where the show could have slowed down, and I really wish they would take that in the next season, because I do believe that there's smart storytelling here and there's good storytelling here, and you got to lean more into that.
Yeah.
I'm on the exact same page here. I think now that we have 2 more seasons, I would like to see it slow down more. And I think Pete, we can do our long form storytelling by slowing things down,
totally
letting beats spread out over time. And for me, I would rather have 20 episodes that are 20 minutes long, 22 minutes long, or whatever. Obviously, that's not on the table, so you got to utilize this space more efficiently, I think. And I understand they crammed a lot in, but sometimes less is more, and that was true in that baseball scene specifically. That was a little scene that went a long way of trying to illustrate the dynamic, well, at least the feelings that Omni-Man has for his son.
Yeah, and that's one of the best moments of the episode, right? And I think that's totally what I'm looking for, right? Is like slow things down so that things matter more.
Exactly. Yeah.
Let
things have the impact. It can't all be blood and guts stuff. Things have to have an impact.
Yeah, and I think like to Sean's point, there are minor threads established that I think are intended to be things we follow later on, but like, if we didn't know we were getting that, like focus on the meat, focus on the core and sell us on that, and then give us the extemporaneous shit later, once we have more space for it.
Yeah.
But I do think they will learn a lot of those lessons. I think between, the positive reception about the things that worked and the criticisms that seem pretty aligned across most of the viewership, I do think we'll see improvements there, and not for nothing too. Like, listening to Kirkman talk about it, the idea of it being like an hour-long show was something that he threw out in an Amazon meeting, and then they were like, yes, and he's like, oh, okay, we got to figure that out now, right? So it's like you have a whole season's worth of learnings and the creatives behind it coming together and coalescing a little bit more. So I'm hoping that they're able to follow up with a sophomore season that feels a lot more polished, and that feels like it knows what it is a little bit more, because it kind of feels like they're starting to figure it out as we go on. I do think the last couple episodes were stronger. So so I mean, overall, this has been a real pleasure for me. I never thought this show would exist. I never thought that any of the adaptation projects for Invincible would really materialize, and if they did, I always worried that they wouldn't
deliver at all.
Yeah, that they wouldn't deliver at all, or that they would like miss the mark. That it wouldn't be
Nice. I see what you did there.
That was 100% not intended, and I wish it was. But I think as someone who was a fan of The Walking Dead for its first few seasons, that was always an adaptation that felt so close to the source material. Like, it really was it had care and it had love for the source material. And with zombies, that was an easier sell to see how you make that happen than with like, this is a superhero story, which isn't by Marvel or DC. So how do we get that over? So the fact that we got here at all is like, if this was all we ever got, it would have been a blessing. So the fact that I've got at least 2 more seasons to look forward to is really, really cool, and something I'm super thankful for as a fan. And it's a show I'm really hoping to see continue to grow and earn a spot for me as like one of my favorites because of the show, not because of my love for the comics.
Yeah.
And I think right now we're kind of teetering, we're walking that line finally, So I'm excited to see where we go from here. That's for damn sure. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us here on this season of We Watch Invincible. It has been a real pleasure. I appreciate you tuning in and hanging out with us. If you haven't checked out the previous 7 episodes, go give them a listen, go give them a watch. Of course, you can also go check out our Invincible book club, where we got through the first 35 issues of the book. You can bet your bottom dollar that when season 2 comes back, we'll have a ton more Invincible content. We'll be back for season 2 of We Watch. We'll have another book club. So the Invincible season is on pause for now, but you can bet your ass we'll be back. So I'm excited to talk more about it in this quiet period. So if you want to come connect with me, come talk to me on Twitter. I'll talk to you about Invincible all goddamn day. But if you want to get some more of the Comics Pals, you can, of course, follow at the Comics Pals wherever your social media is sold. You can head over to wherever you get your podcasts or your YouTubes and give us a subscribe. Come check out all of the other content that we do. We, of course, just completed our sister series. We watched Falcon and the Winter Soldier last week. So if you want to hear our thoughts about that superhero show, you can go listen to that season. We've also done them for WandaVision and Watchmen and all kinds of stuff. So if you haven't checked any of those out, please go do. We'll be back with Loki in June. So if you want to hear us talk about that show, make sure you come back for that. But of course, we also have our weekly show, The Comics Pals, where we get together and talk about everything going on in the world of comics. We talk about related media and characters wherever you can get them. So if that sounds like your bag, if you want to be able to keep up with the world of comics, but have it distilled for you in a perfect, just the real cream of the crop stuff, that Sean goes and picks through all the bullshit, no better way to keep up. So go check it out. Come support us. We really appreciate it. And we'll catch you next time on We Watch. Take care, guys.
What a dysfunctional family. Oh, my God.
We're right here. Don't talk about us like that.